The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the polished marble floor of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Tonight, the ballroom looked like something from a fairy tale, but Lisa Rodriguez knew better than to get lost in the magic. She was here to work, not dream. Lisa adjusted her black uniform and picked up another tray of champagne glasses. The golden liquid sparkled under the lights, each glass worth more than she made in a day. She'd been working at the hotel for 8 months now, ever since her mother got sick and the medical bills started piling up like autumn leaves. "Excuse me, miss." A woman in a diamond necklace that could probably pay off Lisa's student loans waved her over. "Could I get another one of those little shrimp things?" "Of course, ma'am." Lisa smiled politely and headed toward the kitchen. She'd learned to make herself invisible at these events. Rich people liked their help to blend into the background, like expensive furniture that could move and serve drinks. The charity gala was in full swing. The city's wealthiest had gathered to raise money for children's hospitals, though Lisa wondered how much of their donations actually made it to the kids. Still, it wasn't her place to judge. She needed this job too badly to ask uncomfortable questions. As she weaved between tables, Lisa caught glimpses of conversations about stock prices, vacation homes, and private jets. These people lived in a different world entirely, a world where dropping $50,000 at a charity auction was just another Tuesday evening. The music drifted across the room from the grand piano on the small stage. The pianist was good, playing soft jazz that didn't compete with conversation. Lisa found herself slowing down as she passed near the stage, her eyes drawn to his fingers dancing across the keys. She knew that song. Autumn Leaves. Her father used to play it for her when she was little, back when they had a piano in their tiny apartment, back before everything fell apart. Lisa shook her head and kept moving. Those days were long gone, buried under years of struggle and responsibility. She had more important things to worry about now than music. "Lisa, table 12 needs more wine," called Jennifer, the event coordinator. She was nice enough, but she had that stressed look she always got during big events. "And make sure you keep an eye on table 1. That's where David Stone is sitting." Everyone knew who David Stone was. The 36-year-old tech billionaire had made his fortune creating apps that everyone used but no one really understood. His face was on magazine covers and talk shows. People said he was brilliant but cold, the kind of man who saw everything as a business deal. Lisa glanced toward table 1 as she poured wine for table 12. Stone sat at the center like a king holding court, surrounded by other wealthy men who hung on his every word. He looked exactly like his photos, tall, sharp-dressed, with dark hair that probably cost more to style than Lisa made in a week. But there was something in his eyes that the magazines didn't capture. A hardness, like he was always calculating, always looking for an advantage. Lisa had seen that look before in landlords and loan officers. It was the look of someone who held all the power and knew it. Stone said something that made his companions laugh, but Lisa noticed he didn't smile. He just watched their reactions like he was studying them. Everything about him seemed controlled, measured. Even the way he held his wine glass looked like a business decision. Lisa finished serving table 12 and headed back toward the kitchen. The pianist had switched to something softer, maybe Debussy. Her fingers twitched at her sides, remembering the feel of ivory keys under her touch. "Stop it," she told herself. "That life is over. Did you hear about the Johnson merger?" She overheard from a nearby table. "Stone basically crushed them. Bought them out for half what they were worth last year." "That's David for you," another voice replied. "Ruthless but effective. Though I heard he can be quite entertaining when he wants to be. Remember that party where he made that waiter sing karaoke?" They laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She'd heard stories about rich people who treated service workers like their personal entertainment. Usually she tried not to think about those stories. The evening wore on. Lisa's feet ached in her cheap shoes, but she kept smiling, kept serving, kept invisible. That was the key to surviving these events. Don't draw attention. Don't give anyone a reason to notice you. But as she cleared empty plates from a table near the stage, she found herself watching the pianist again. His technique was smooth but safe, playing the kind of background music that wealthy people expected. Nothing too challenging or emotional, just pretty sounds to fill the air. Lisa's fingers moved slightly, phantom playing along with the melody. She'd learned this piece when she was 16, had played it for her audition at the music academy. That felt like a lifetime ago now. "Careful there, honey," said an older woman at the table. "You look like you're about to float away." Lisa snapped back to reality, her cheeks burning. "Sorry, ma'am. Just enjoying the music." "Oh, do you play?" the woman asked with genuine interest. "I used to," Lisa managed, then quickly gathered the remaining plates. "Excuse me." She hurried away before the conversation could continue. The last thing she needed was to start talking about her past. That would only lead to questions she couldn't answer, dreams she couldn't afford to remember. Near the stage, the pianist announced he was taking a short break. The music stopped, leaving only the buzz of conversation and the clink of glasses. Lisa felt the silence where the piano should be like a physical ache. She was refilling water glasses at table 7 when she heard David Stone's voice rising above the general chatter. He sounded different now, sharper somehow, like he was getting bored with the polite small talk. "This whole evening is starting to drag," he said to his companions. "Same speeches, same music, same people pretending to care about charity." Lisa glanced over and saw him leaning back in his chair, wine glass in hand, scanning the room like a predator looking for prey. His eyes moved over the other guests dismissively, then swept across the stage where the empty piano bench sat waiting. Something cold settled in Lisa's stomach. She'd seen that look before, in the stories Jennifer told about difficult guests. It was the look of someone who was about to make trouble just because he could. The pianist was still on his break, chatting with some guests near the bar. The stage looked lonely without music, the grand piano sitting silent like a sleeping giant. Lisa tried to focus on her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was building in the room. Like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air gets thick and electric, David Stone's laughter cut through her thoughts. Sharp and cold, it made several nearby guests turn to look. Whatever he was planning, Lisa had a sinking feeling that someone was about to have a very long night. David Stone swirled the wine in his glass and watched the room with growing irritation. The charity speeches had ended 20 minutes ago, but the pianist was still nowhere to be seen. The silence felt heavy, awkward. Conversations were starting to lag without background music to smooth over the uncomfortable pauses. "Where did that piano player disappear to?" David muttered to his friend Robert, who owned 3 hotels downtown. "Probably stepped out for a smoke break," Robert replied. "These hired musicians always think they can just vanish whenever they want." David's jaw tightened. He paid good money to attend these events, and he expected everything to run smoothly. The least they could do was keep the entertainment going. He was about to call over the event coordinator when something caught his eye. Near table 9, the young waitress who'd been serving drinks all evening was standing perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the empty piano. Her right hand hung at her side, fingers moving in small, precise motions. David watched, fascinated despite himself, as her fingers continued their invisible dance. She was playing along to music that wasn't there. Well, David said softly, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Robert, look at that waitress over there. The one with the dark hair." Robert followed his gaze. "What about her?" "Watch her hand." They both stared as Lisa continued her phantom performance, completely unaware she was being observed. Her fingers moved with surprising grace, like she was playing something complex and beautiful that only she could hear. "Interesting," Robert said with a chuckle. "Think she actually knows how to play?" David's smile widened, but there was something cold behind it. "Only one way to find out." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound was loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Several conversations paused as people turned to see what David Stone was doing. "Ladies and gentlemen," David called out, his voice carrying easily across the room. "It seems our pianist has abandoned us for the evening." More heads turned. Lisa, startled by the sudden attention, looked around in confusion. Her cheeks flushed red when she realized everyone was staring in her direction. "But I think we might have some hidden talent right here among the staff," David continued, walking toward Lisa with predatory confidence. "Miss, could you come here for a moment?" Lisa's stomach dropped. She glanced around desperately, hoping he was talking to someone else, but his eyes were locked on her. The entire ballroom seemed to be holding its breath. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly, "but I'm working right now." "Oh, don't worry about that," David waved dismissively. "I'm sure your manager won't mind if you take a little break." "Will you?" He looked directly at Jennifer, who was standing near the kitchen entrance looking panicked. Jennifer nodded quickly. She wouldn't dare tell David Stone no, not when the hotel depended on events like this for business. David turned back to Lisa with a triumphant expression. "See, all settled. Now I couldn't help but notice you seem quite interested in our piano over there." Lisa's hands trembled slightly. The music was nice, that's all. "Were you playing along?" David asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. "It looked like you were playing along." The crowd pressed closer, sensing entertainment. Lisa felt trapped, like a small animal surrounded by predators. I was just. She was definitely moving her fingers like she was playing, called out Mrs. Harrison from table 4. "I saw it too." "Fascinating," David said, his voice dripping with fake charm. "Tell me, do you actually know how to play the piano?" Lisa's mouth went dry. "A little," she whispered. "A little?" David's eyebrows shot up dramatically. "Well then, this is perfect. Our pianist seems to have vanished, and here you are with musical skills. Why don't you give us a little performance?" "Oh no, I couldn't," Lisa said quickly, backing away a step. I'm just here to serve drinks." "Nonsense," David pressed, following her. "I'm sure everyone would love to hear what you can do. Wouldn't you all like some music?" A few people in the crowd murmured agreement, but Lisa could see the cruel amusement in their eyes. This wasn't about music. This was about watching the help perform like a trained animal. "Really, sir, I can't," Lisa said, her voice barely audible. "I'm not good enough for something like this." "Oh, come now," David said with mock encouragement. "I'm sure you're being modest. Besides, I'll make it worth your while." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet, making sure everyone could see the thick stack of bills inside. "How about this? Play us one song, just one, and I'll give you—" He paused dramatically. $200. Lisa's eyes widened. $200. That would cover her mother's medication for almost 2 weeks. But the thought of playing in front of all these people, of potentially embarrassing herself, made her feel sick. "I really can't," she said desperately. "I haven't played in years. I'll mess it up." "Even better," David laughed. "No pressure then. Just have some fun with it." But Lisa could see the trap he was setting. If she played badly, they'd all laugh at the silly waitress who thought she could make music. If she refused, she'd look ungrateful and difficult. Either way, she'd be entertainment for people who saw her as less than human. "The thing is," she said, trying one last escape, "I really do need to get back to work. People need their drinks refilled and—" $300, David announced loudly. The crowd stirred. That was serious money. More than Lisa made in 2 weeks of double shifts. Her mother's next doctor appointment was next Tuesday. They'd already gotten 2 notices about overdue bills. Lisa felt the weight of every eye in the room. Rich people in expensive clothes watching her like she was a circus act. But $300, her mother's medicine, the electric bill that was due tomorrow. She started, then stopped. "It's just one song," David said, his voice gentler now, but his eyes still sharp. "Nothing fancy. Whatever you remember." Lisa looked at the piano, then at David, then at all the expectant faces surrounding her. Her heart hammered in her chest. She thought about her mother lying in the hospital bed last week, how frail she'd looked, how the nurses kept talking about new treatments they couldn't afford. "Just one song?" she asked in a voice so quiet David had to lean forward to hear her. "Just one," he confirmed with a satisfied smile. Lisa nodded slowly, feeling like she was signing her own execution warrant. "Okay." The crowd parted as she walked toward the stage, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. Each step echoed in the sudden silence. Someone had dimmed the light slightly, making the piano look even more imposing under the warm stage lighting. Lisa sat down at the bench and stared at the keys, 88 black and white rectangles that used to be her whole world. Her fingers hovered over them, shaking slightly. Behind her, she could hear David settling back into his chair, probably already planning how he'd tell this story to his friends tomorrow. The poor little waitress who thought she could play piano at a fancy charity event. Lisa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Whatever happened next, at least her mother would have her medication. Lisa stared at the piano keys, her hands trembling above them like she was about to touch something that might burn her. The ballroom had gone completely quiet. Even the kitchen sounds had stopped, as if the entire hotel was holding its breath. She could feel David Stone's satisfied smile behind her, could imagine him already planning how to tell this story to his wealthy friends. The waitress who thought she could play piano. It would be good for a laugh over expensive cigars and brandy. "Whenever you're ready," David called out, his voice carrying that same mocking tone he'd used all evening. Lisa's fingers found the keys, but she didn't press down yet. The ivory felt cold and familiar under her fingertips, like greeting an old friend after years apart. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Music doesn't come from your hands, Mija. It comes from your heart." She started with something simple, a basic chord progression that any first-year student might know. The notes rang out softly in the huge room, pleasant but unremarkable. Exactly what everyone expected from a waitress playing piano. Behind her, she heard David settle back in his chair with a quiet chuckle. Someone whispered, "Well, at least she can hit the right notes." But then something strange happened. Lisa's muscle memory began to take over. Her left hand found a bass line that was a little more complex than it needed to be. Her right hand added a melody that twisted and curved in unexpected ways. The simple song she'd started became something else entirely. The whispers stopped. Lisa felt the familiar warmth spreading through her chest. The feeling she'd missed more than she'd ever admitted to herself. It was like coming home after a long, difficult journey. Her hands knew exactly what to do, even after all these years. She transitioned into a piece by Chopin, one of the ones that had made her fall in love with music in the first place. Ballad number 1. It started gently, almost like a lullaby, but Lisa knew what was coming. She'd performed this piece dozens of times before her world fell apart. The melody grew more complex, her fingers moving faster across the keys. What had started as party background music became something else entirely, something that demanded attention. Lisa forgot about the crowd behind her. She forgot about David Stone and his cruel smile. She forgot about her uniform and her aching feet and the tips she needed to count at the end of the night. There was only the music, flowing through her like water through a broken dam. Her technique was flawless. Years of practice had built patterns in her muscle memory that time couldn't erase. Her fingers flew across the keys in passages that would challenge professional pianists. Each note crystal clear and perfectly timed. The Chopin piece had sections that were soft and melancholy, followed by others that were thunderous and passionate. Lisa played them all with the kind of emotional depth that came from having lived through real loss, real struggle. This wasn't just technical skill. This was someone pouring their soul into the music. Behind her, David Stone's smug expression had completely vanished. His mouth hung open slightly as he watched this waitress, this woman he'd thought he could humiliate for entertainment, play with the skill of a conservatory graduate. The crowd was mesmerized. Wine glasses sat forgotten on tables. Conversations had died completely. Even the kitchen staff had crept out to listen, standing in doorways with expressions of shock and wonder. Lisa moved into the most challenging section of the piece, where the left and right hands played completely different rhythms that somehow came together in perfect harmony. Her fingers moved so quickly they almost blurred, but every note was precise, intentional. She leaned into the more dramatic passages, her whole body moving with the music. Mrs. Patterson, who sat on the board of the city's symphony orchestra, grabbed her husband's arm. "Richard," she whispered urgently, "do you hear this? This is conservatory-level playing." But Lisa wasn't done. As the Chopin piece reached its conclusion, instead of stopping, she moved seamlessly into something else. A piece by Rachmaninoff this time, even more technically demanding. Her hands stretched across octaves that most people couldn't reach, playing passages that required years of training to master. The music filled every corner of the ballroom, rich and complex and heartbreakingly beautiful. Some people in the audience had tears in their eyes without quite understanding why. There was something in Lisa's playing that spoke to losses they'd all experienced, dreams they'd all given up. David Stone sat frozen in his chair, his wine glass gripping so tightly his knuckles were white. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. He'd expected amusement, maybe some light embarrassment for the waitress who'd gotten above herself. He hadn't expected to witness something that was making his chest tight with emotions he didn't want to name. And Jennifer, the event coordinator, stood near the kitchen entrance with tears streaming down her face. She'd worked with Lisa for months and had never suspected anything like this. How many times had Lisa served drinks and cleared plates while this incredible talent stayed hidden inside her? The Rachmaninoff piece built to a climax that seemed to shake the chandeliers. Lisa's hands moved with impossible speed and precision, playing passages that looked like magic to anyone who didn't understand music. But it wasn't just technical skill. Every note carried weight, emotion, Years of suppressed dreams and desperate hope. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the music started to slow. Lisa transitioned into something softer, more personal, a piece her father had taught her when she was 12, simple but beautiful. The kind of song that didn't need technical fireworks because it came straight from the heart. As she played those final, gentle notes, something changed in Lisa's posture. The confidence and strength that had carried her through the performance began to crack. The weight of everything she'd given up, everything she'd lost, started pressing down on her again. Her fingers slowed. The last notes hung in the air like a question that couldn't be answered. Lisa's hands dropped to her lap, and for a moment, the ballroom was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Then someone started clapping. It was Mrs. Patterson, the symphony board member, who stood up first. Her applause was joined by her husband, then by the people at the next table, then by everyone in the room. The sound built until it was thunderous, echoing off the marble walls and crystal chandeliers. But Lisa didn't turn around to acknowledge it. She sat at the piano bench with her head down, her shoulders shaking slightly. Because playing again, feeling that music flow through her after so many years of silence, had reminded her of everything she'd lost, everything she could never get back. David Stone stared at her hunched shoulders, at this woman who'd just delivered one of the most beautiful performances he'd ever heard, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. For the first time in years, he was the one who felt small. The applause finally died down, but Lisa still sat at the piano with her head bowed. Her hands rested in her lap, trembling slightly from the emotional toll of playing again after so many years. She couldn't bring herself to turn around and face the crowd. The music had torn open wounds she'd spent years trying to heal. An elderly woman in an elegant black dress made her way toward the stage. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and she moved with the kind of grace that spoke of decades spent in concert halls and opera houses. Everyone in the room recognized her. Victoria Chen, the most respected music patron in the city, whose foundation had launched dozens of classical careers. Victoria climbed the small steps to the stage with careful dignity. She approached Lisa slowly, like someone might approach a wounded bird. "My dear," Victoria said softly, placing a gentle hand on Lisa's shoulder. That was extraordinary. Lisa looked up with tear-stained cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it wasn't what anyone expected. I should have just played something simple." Victoria's eyes widened with surprise. "Sorry, child? That was one of the most moving performances I've heard in 40 years of attending concerts. Your interpretation of the Chopin was breathtaking. And that Rachmaninoff." She shook her head in wonder. "Where did you study?" The question hung in the air like a challenge Lisa wasn't ready to face. She glanced toward the crowd where hundreds of eyes were still watching her every move. David Stone sat at his table looking pale and shaken, as if he'd witnessed something that had fundamentally changed his understanding of the world. "I didn't really study anywhere," Lisa said quietly. "Not officially." "Nonsense," Victoria replied firmly but kindly. "Nobody plays like that without serious training. You have technique that takes decades to develop. The way you handled those octave passages in the Rachmaninoff, the emotional depth in the Chopin. This isn't amateur playing, dear. This is professional level." Lisa's composure finally cracked completely. The tears she'd been holding back since she first sat down at the piano began flowing freely. "I was supposed to go to Juilliard," she said in a voice so quiet Victoria had to lean closer to hear. "I had a full scholarship. Everything was planned out." The older woman's expression softened with understanding. She'd seen this story before. Talented young people whose dreams were derailed by life's cruel timing. What happened? Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, aware that the entire ballroom was listening to every word. "My father died when I was 18, she said. "Heart attack." "No warning, nothing. Just gone," Victoria nodded sadly. "And you had to give up the scholarship." "Mom couldn't work much after that. The grief, the stress, it made her sick. And my little brother was only 15. Someone had to take care of the family." Lisa's voice grew stronger as she continued, as if telling the story was helping her process emotions she'd buried for years. "The scholarship wouldn't wait. They needed an answer right away, and we needed money for rent and food and Dad's funeral bills." The crowd had gone completely silent again. Even the kitchen staff, who had crept out to listen to the music, stood frozen by this unexpected glimpse into their co-worker's hidden life. "So you've been working Instead of pursuing music, Victoria said. It wasn't a question. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Whatever I could find. Waitressing, cleaning offices, stocking shelves. Anything to keep us going. Lisa finally turned to face the audience, her eyes sweeping across all the wealthy faces staring back at her. Music became something I couldn't afford to think about. It hurt too much. David Stone felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. He thought about his own privileged life, how he'd never had to choose between dreams and survival. He'd gone to the best schools, had every opportunity handed to him, and he'd used that privilege to humiliate someone who'd sacrificed everything for her family. Mrs. Patterson, the symphony board member, stood up from her table. How long has it been since you played seriously? She called out. 6 years, Lisa replied. Tonight was the first time I've touched a piano since Dad's funeral. We had to sell ours to help pay for the service. The admission sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. 6 years without practice and she'd still played like a virtuoso. Victoria Chen looked absolutely stunned. 6 years and you played like that? Victoria asked incredulously. My dear, do you understand how extraordinary that is? Most professional pianists would lose their edge after 6 months without serious practice. Lisa shrugged helplessly. Music was all I cared about when I was younger. Dad always said I had a gift, but I figured I'd lost it by now. I work so much I barely have time to sleep, let alone think about playing. A man in the expensive suit near the front spoke up. What about your family now? Are they still? Mom's doing better, Lisa said, managing a small smile. She's been in remission for 2 years. My brother graduated high school last year and got a partial scholarship for college. Things are finally starting to look up, but the medical bills from when she was really sick. She trailed off, not wanting to burden these strangers with more details about her financial struggles. David Stone couldn't take it anymore. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor again. But this time, instead of the predatory confidence he'd shown earlier, he looked uncertain, almost nervous. I need to apologize, he said loudly, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. I brought you up here as entertainment. I thought it would be amusing to watch you struggle with something you clearly weren't qualified for. Lisa looked at him with surprise. She'd expected many reactions to her story, but a public apology from David Stone wasn't one of them. I was wrong, David continued, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't used to showing in public. Completely horribly wrong. You have more talent in your little finger than I have in my entire body, and I treated you like a circus act. The crowd watched this unusual scene unfold. David Stone, known for his ruthless business tactics and cold demeanor, was publicly admitting fault to a waitress. It was the kind of moment that would be talked about for years in their social circles. Victoria Chen looked between David and Lisa with growing understanding. You know, she said thoughtfully, talent like this doesn't just disappear. With the right support, the right opportunities. She turned to Lisa with eyes bright with possibility. What if I told you it's not too late? That there might still be a path back to the music that was taken from you? Lisa stared at her, afraid to hope. What do you mean? I mean, Victoria said with a growing smile, that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from people who've experienced real pain, real loss. You've lived through things that could make your playing even more powerful than it was 6 years ago. David Stone stepped forward, his face set with determination. Whatever it takes, he said firmly. Whatever you need to get back to music, consider it done. It's the least I can do after what I put you through tonight. Lisa looked around the ballroom at all these wealthy, powerful people who were suddenly treating her like something precious instead of invisible. For the first time in 6 years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than just survival. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to dream again. 3 days after the charity gala, Lisa stood outside the most expensive medical center in the city, holding an envelope that felt like it might contain a miracle. Inside was a check that would cover all of her mother's remaining medical bills, plus enough for the experimental treatment the doctors had mentioned but dismissed as too costly. David Stone had been true to his word, but he'd done more than just write a check. He'd made phone calls, pulled strings, and used his connections to get her mother seen by the best specialists in the country. When Lisa had tried to thank him, he'd simply said, "It's not charity. It's an apology." But the medical bills were just the beginning. Lisa walked into the practice room that Victoria Chen had arranged for her at the music conservatory downtown. It was small but perfect, with a beautiful grand piano and windows that looked out over the city. For the past month, she'd been coming here every day after her morning shift at the hotel, slowly building back the calluses on her fingertips and the strength in her hands. The muscle memory was still there, stronger than she'd dared to hope. But more than that, the music felt different now, deeper somehow. The years of struggle, of loss and sacrifice, had given her something to say that she'd never had when she was 18. Victoria had introduced her to Professor Martinez, an elderly man who'd taught at Juilliard for 30 years before retiring. He'd agreed to work with Lisa privately, refusing to accept payment. "Talent like yours doesn't come along often," he'd said. "Teaching you isn't work. It's a privilege." Lisa was working through a particularly difficult passage when her phone buzzed. A text message from her brother. "Got into the engineering program. Full scholarship!" Mom cried for an hour. She smiled and set the phone aside. Her family was thriving in ways that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. Her mother's health had improved dramatically with the new treatment. Her brother was following his own dreams instead of feeling pressured to get a job right out of high school. The crushing weight of being everyone's provider had finally lifted from Lisa's shoulders. There was a soft knock on the practice room door. Lisa looked up to see David Stone standing in the hallway, looking uncertain in a way that would have surprised anyone who'd known him before that night at the gala. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "Victoria mentioned you practice here in the afternoons." "It's fine," Lisa said, gesturing for him to come in. "Actually, I wanted to thank you again. What you've done for my family." David held up a hand to stop her. "I told you it's not charity. Besides, you've done something for me too." Lisa looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" David sat down in one of the chairs near the window, looking oddly vulnerable. "That night at the gala, watching you play, hearing your story, it made me realize what kind of person I'd become. I was using my money and power to hurt people, just because I could, just because I was bored." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that made him look younger and less intimidating than the man who'd humiliated her at the charity event. "I've spent the last 3 months trying to figure out how to be better. It's harder than it sounds." "What do you mean?" Lisa asked. "I've been visiting the children's hospital that the gala was supposed to benefit, not for photo ops or tax write-offs, but just to spend time with kids who are going through things that make my problems look ridiculous." David's voice grew quieter. "There's this 8-year-old girl named Sophia who's been there for months. Her parents can't afford to visit very often because they live 3 hours away and can't miss work." Lisa could see where this was going. "You've been helping them." "I've been trying to help a lot of people, actually. Quietly. No press releases. No charity galas where rich people pat themselves on the back for writing checks." David looked directly at Lisa. "You showed me what real sacrifice looks like, what it means to put other people before yourself." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of other students practicing in rooms throughout the building. "Can I ask you something?" David said finally. Lisa nodded. "Are you happy? I mean, really happy? Because I know I pushed you back toward music that night, and I've been wondering if maybe you didn't want to go back. Maybe you'd made peace with leaving it behind." Lisa considered the question carefully. "For a long time I thought I was okay without music. I told myself it was just something from my past, like being afraid of the dark or believing in the tooth fairy. Something I'd outgrown." She played a few soft notes on the piano, a simple melody that sounded like contentment. "But the truth is, giving up music was like giving up breathing. I just got used to feeling suffocated all the time. I thought that was normal. And now?" Lisa's face lit up with genuine joy. "Now I remember what it feels like to be fully alive. Music isn't just something I do. It's who I am." "I'd forgotten that." David smiled, and for the first time since Lisa had known him, it looked completely genuine. "I'm glad. And I'm glad you're getting your chance, even if it took me being an ass to make it happen." Lisa laughed, surprising them both. "You know what's funny? I've been angry at you for years. But we only met 3 months ago. Not you specifically. People like you. Rich people who treat service workers like we're invisible, like we don't have dreams or feelings or stories of our own." Lisa's voice was matter of fact, not bitter. "But meeting you, seeing you change, it's made me realize something important." "What's that?" "Everyone's fighting battles other people can't see. Even rich people who seem to have everything." Lisa looked at David with genuine compassion. "You were cruel that night, but you were also miserable. I could see it in your eyes. David was quiet for a long moment. I was. I didn't even realize it until you played that music and I saw what real passion looked like, what it meant to create something beautiful instead of just consuming things. 6 months later, Lisa stood on the stage of the city's symphony hall, wearing an elegant black dress that Victoria had insisted on buying for her. The orchestra sat behind her, ready to accompany her in a performance of the Rachmaninoff concerto that had helped change her life. In the audience, her mother sat in the front row, healthy and glowing with pride. Her brother was there too, home from his first semester of college, beaming as he recorded everything on his phone. And in the back, trying to stay unnoticed, David Stone sat alone. He'd funded the entire concert series that had given Lisa this opportunity, but he'd refused to let his name be attached to it publicly. Some changes, he'd learned, were more meaningful when they happened quietly. As Lisa placed her hands on the piano keys and nodded to the conductor, she thought about the strange path that had led her to this moment. Sometimes the worst nights of your life could become the doorways to the best ones. Sometimes being broken down completely was the only way to discover who you really were underneath. The music began, and Lisa let herself disappear into it completely, knowing that this time, she'd never have to come back to a world without songs. In the back of the hall, David Stone closed his eyes and listened to the most beautiful thing he'd ever helped create. Not with his money, but with his willingness to change. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt genuinely proud of who he was becoming.